I'm Emily Austin from Wake Forest University. I'm in the philosophy department. I'm here to introduce the next speaker. The first part of the presentation will be done by Matthias Mehl from University of Arizona, and then he'll hand off the baton to his collaborator Samin Nazir, who is at Washington University in St. Louis. And they'll be talking about eavesdropping on character, testing the stability, variability, and changeability of naturalistically observed virtuous daily behavior. So join me in welcoming.
Thank you very much. It's really a great pleasure. It's been a wonderful 2 days with lots and lots of wonderful studies and great data, and I look forward to the second workshop next year. And just as a caveat, so in our talk today, we're going to talk mostly about the idea and the study and the conceptual and methodological background, and we're going to present only very little pilot data, but we will have the full data and the full show next time. So I think it's fair to say that the person-situation debate has been with us for quite a while. Some would put the start date here, some would put it here with Hartshorne and May's studies on honesty and the lack of, presumed lack of cross-situational consistency. And recently, there was a special issue in the Journal of Research and Personality, edited in fact, or co-edited in part by Will Fleeson, that brought together a lot of testimonies about the person-situation debate and perspectives on it. And I think it's still fair to say that despite the fact that we've been with the person-situation debate for a while, there's still a number of rather basic, mostly psychometric issues that have not been fully answered, or at least have not been answered with very good data. So the purpose of our project is to shed new light on questions around the existence of moral character by examining the convergence among different measures of moral character, and that's self-report measures, that's informant report measures, and that's behavioral observation measures, and testing the stability and variability and changeability of virtuous daily behavior relative to more neutral, non-virtuous daily behaviors and relative to negative daily behavior, so I guess you could call them vices. We do so in a specific way. We use a novel methodology that allows for the naturalistic observation of daily behavior, and we call that methodology the electronically activated recorder. So conceptually, what it really is, it's naturalistic observation. It's kind of interesting that the person-situation debate in some ways started with naturalistic observation with Hartshorne and May, but then there was very little observational research testing stability and variability. So we tried to revive that in some way by bringing naturalistic observation back to the study of character. And again, the way we do so is by using the technology called the ear, the electronically activated recorder. And it's really very simple. The ear is an audio recorder that people carry around, in some ways actually just like the thing that I'm wearing right now, that comes on periodically for short periods of time, usually 30 seconds, say every 12 minutes or so, and logs a person's acoustic daily life. And so the participants carry it around for a few days, bring it back to us. They don't have to do anything else but wearing the device. What we get is an acoustic log of a person's day as it naturally unfolds. And from there, we need to extract information about it, code data, and so on. So we get, on a typical day with a typical sampling rate, we get about 70 to 90 data points, 70, 90 situations. Importantly, we only record 5% of the day, so we leave 95% of the day private in the first place. We have a series of considerations around protecting participants' privacy. So for example, participants have a chance to delete sound files if they prefer to do so, so we give them full control. We make them collaborators. We make them feel good about the study. And we have very good compliance rates overall. But I could talk a lot about the ear, or this is our latest version, the iEar, and you can download it actually from the App Store. But I think it's more vivid if I present you a couple of sound files, how the ear sounds. And so these are files that show what the ear records, but they also show that character is on our participants' minds. So virtuous behaviors are being talked about in daily life. Another one. Oops.
And I was like, no, because I don't, Yeah. They're friends that I just do not trust, but they're still my friends. Yeah. But, like Curry, I consider her a friend, but I wouldn't trust her as far as I could know her. And, but then it said, you consider yourself a trusting person. And I consider myself a trusting person. And that can be contradictory.
So I show them because obviously they're interesting sound files, but I mostly show them to give you a sense of how natural participants behave. And yes, at the very beginning, there is a period where people have a heightened a sense of self-awareness, and am I recorded right now? But then life gets busy and life goes on, and people habituate to it, so they behave overall pretty naturally. Why do we think that the ear is a good methodology to use for studying character? I think there's a number of reasons. First, most research on the stability of behavior has been conducted using self-reports, and we think that it's important to supplement that with behavioral observation because behavioral observation is less prone to social desirability biases. Behavioral observation also sometimes can get you very different information. So we have one study, for example, where we looked at gender differences in talkativeness, and there's this general notion that women are by a factor more talkative than men, and in fact, if you ask women, do you consider yourself to be a talkative person? Women report being more talkative than men, but across 6 studies and almost 300 people, we find no difference in total word use whatsoever. In another study, we looked at sociability in a cross-cultural context, and there's lots of research, self-report research, showing that Americans self-report being more extroverted, more sociable, and more talkative than Mexicans. And so we conducted a study in the US and in Mexico, and we found that in our study also, Americans reported being more extroverted, sociable, and talkative, but Mexicans behaved more extroverted and more sociable and talkative. In fact, they spend 9% more time talking than Americans. So you can get, at times, quite different pictures from the two methodologies. We think it's also important because, and that was talked about yesterday a little bit, it not only samples participants from populations, but it also samples situations from underlying ecology. So Brunswick would call that a representative design. So we make sure that the behaviors we sample are representative, which facilitates generalizability. It helps us to focus on what the field has recently identified as important, to focus on actual behavior, well, you can actually just cancel actual behavior rather than reaction times, meaningful behavior, reaction time self-reports, and so on. That's a point that's kind of close to my heart. It also focuses on a specific kind of behavior. It focuses on the ordinary behavior, and that's important for this grant. We're not focusing on extraordinarily virtuous behaviors, on jumping in to save somebody, jumping in to help somebody. But we're focused on virtuous daily behavior, virtuous behavior as it happens over the course of a day, the little ones, the small ones. And it was Kenneth Craig, who unfortunately very recently passed away, who said, lives are lived day by day, day in, day out, from day to day, one day at a time. And that's why we should look at day as a natural unit and things that happen in a day. And finally, the ear method allows for emergence of stability on 2 levels, for emergence of stability at the levels of how people interact in situations and act in situations, but also how people select situations in the first place, because we track people's naturally occurring daily social environments. The specific aims of the proposal were the following. There were 4 aims. The first one is kind of a construct validation in some way of the ear methodology for measuring virtuous daily behavior. And there we look at the convergence among multiple measures of moral character. So that's self-report of moral character, informal reports of moral character, and virtuous behavior that's displayed in daily life. And that's the aim that Simin Vazir will be giving you some preliminary data after me. The second aim is, well, person-situation debate to test the stability. How stable is virtuous daily behavior from the observer's point of view rather than from the agent's point of view? So investigate the stability of naturalistically observed virtuous daily behavior relative to the stability of more neutral, non-virtuous behaviors, if you want so, and relative to evaluatively negative daily behaviors or vices. I'm tempted to call them vicious behaviors, but I guess that's not the right term. Third one is investigate the amount of within-person variability in virtuous daily behavior, so that, the state traits as density distributions of distribution of states model predicts that there's lots of variability within person, and in fact possibly more variability than between persons. So we can test that. We can see how much variability is there over the course of a day, and how that relates to A, between person variability, and A, within person variability in the neutral behavior and the negative behavior. And the fourth aim is to investigate the potential for change in virtuous daily behavior. So there we have an intervention. It's an intervention that's aimed at increasing moral behavior. Specifically, it's a meditation intervention, a compassion meditation intervention, and we can see how those behaviors that we code for change from before to after relative to the neutral behaviors. For this grant, we use a combo of archival ear data, and we conduct one new ear study that's been conducted at WashU. So the first sample is a study in progress that's been conducted at WashU, and the other samples are archival ear studies from my lab, with this one actually still going on. That's a meditation study. So overall, we have more than 300 participants, more than 100,000 real-world situations, different sampling rates, different lengths, and so on. These are some of the behaviors that we're going to look at. So we developed a coding system for identifying virtuous daily behaviors from ambient sounds. And this is not an exhaustive range of virtuous daily behaviors. Those are the behaviors that we're fairly confident that we can code them. And those are behaviors that specific enough for us to say, well, we can identify cues that provide unambiguous information about them. So there's two categories. There's the group that we call virtuous daily behaviors, the group that we call evaluative negative daily behaviors. And so an example here would be gratitude, showing affection, offering praise, making compliments, apologizing, expressing hope, showing optimism, showing sympathy, empathy, concern. And I know that there's differences among them, but we clustered them together because otherwise you get a really, really low base rate. And negative ones are blaming, being sarcastic, being condescending, arrogant, complaining, whining, criticizing, and bragging. We have established intercoder reliability. The intercoder reliability naturally varies with the base rate of the behavior and so on, but overall I think we have quite good reliability, except maybe a couple of cases where at this point I think it's because that was based on the training file and there was just very little variability in the training file. In fact, this one, there was not an incident of bragging, but we will calculate intercoder reliability upon completing all sound files, and if something were not to be reliable, then we can add another coder. Okay, so I think it may be interesting to supplement the description of those categories with another two sound files that show examples of them. So the first sound files were conversations about virtuous behaviors. These are, which would not be coded as virtuous behaviors naturally, but these are now virtuous behaviors that we do code. And so here is one of our negative daily behaviors, and this one would be coded as complaining, whining, and criticizing. So both of them, they're not mutually exclusive. And this is well, naturally because it's a little bit strong. So. But it's daily life.
Then get off your butt and fix some lunch. You gotta have something. It's going on 2 o'clock. That's what I'm saying here.
And to finish on a positive note, here's an example of gratitude as experienced by one of our participants with rheumatoid arthritis. Oops. I don't like this new thing.
Ed still does it for me. It fills the car with gas and takes care of the little things of life, the tortures. Well, that's just a happy family, happy marriage. We do little things for each other.
So she talks about her husband and shows gratitude. She's actually talking to a friend, and she expresses gratitude. Okay, in terms of data analysis, what we will do, so we code all the sound files for these behaviors. We implement it across site. And then once we have all the codings in, we calculate the base rates, and we select three sets of behaviors. So we have the virtuous daily behaviors, and we match them with neutral daily behaviors, and we have the evaluative negative daily behaviors. And neutral daily behaviors we select so that in the set we have overall matched base rate, because reliability is much determined by base rate. We try to aim at matching variability to the extent we can, and ideally we would also match the intercorrelations, so in that order of priority. And then we can analyze the specific aims. So for the first one, we will look at self-report measures, informant report measures, and these sets of behaviors, and Simin will give you some pilot data there. In terms of stability, we have two ways to do so. We can do odd, even day stability, so Monday, Wednesday, Friday, compared to Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. And we can do test-retest reliability in the different samples depending on the nature. So we have one 6-day sample. We can do odd, even days. If we have 2 year weekends, 2 weeks apart, we can do test-retest reliability. And again, we compare, in this case, for example, the stability. Well, we look at overall level of stability to show how stable is virtuous daily behavior and how does that compare to what we know about the stability of behavior. But we can also compare it relative to the other two sets. And I guess our expectation by default would be that they come out relatively comparable, but then it would be kind of, if they were to come out differently, that would be interesting. We can look at within-person variability in gratitude, so how much people vary in showing gratitude over the course of, say, 2 to 4 days, relative to how much they vary on neutral behaviors, such as talking to themselves, using numbers, or like pretty trivial behaviors that are not morally connotated. And finally, we can look at changeability. So this meditation intervention is meant to change virtuous behavior. So does it change virtuous behavior? And if so, does it change virtuous behavior more so than evaluative and neutral, which is what you would strongly expect, I guess. We are in the midst of coding. Coding takes a long time. So we have not compiled data yet because we're still collecting it. So we present all of the stability analysis and variability analysis next time. But we do have pilot data from the construct validation, or multi-method study, if you want. So, and that's what Simin will be doing right now.
Okay, so as Matthias mentioned, the data I'm going to show you are still preliminary. We finished data collection, but as Matthias mentioned, coding takes a long time. So I'm showing you the results we have so far more so that you have a sense of the types of analyses we're going to do rather than for interpreting the magnitude of the effects or that kind of thing. Okay, so we did a couple different types of analyses that we're going to do. And we're drawing from basically the history of personality research to establish that traits are real. You do certain kinds of analyses, and we're going to basically do the same thing for the ratings of moral behaviors and moral traits that we got. So basically the two types of analysis you can do to establish the validity of constructs are convergence among raters, so self and informants agreeing with each other, and then that those ratings predict behavior. So first for convergence among raters, typically for the big five, self-other agreements usually around 0.3 to 0.4, sometimes 0.5, 0.6 with really well-acquainted others and really reliable measures. But meta-analyses typically find about 0.3 to 0.4 self-other agreement for well-validated constructs, so that's kind of a benchmark to keep in mind. And so we looked at self-other agreement in 5 different studies where we had ratings of moral traits and behaviors. So these are the number of targets and the number of informants. So each target nominated multiple informants. And we averaged across the informants before correlating them with the target self-ratings. So across these 5 studies, I'll just give a very general description of the methods. So they were either conducted in the lab. Some of them were classroom activities that we then used for research purposes. So we got self-reports of moral traits or behaviors, and we also got some Big 5 ratings, which I won't present about, but if you're curious, I'd be happy to tell you more about the correlations with the Big 5. They nominated informants. We sometimes specified what kinds of informants we wanted. Sometimes just said 3 people who know you well. Sometimes it was 8 people. And the informants provided ratings of the targets, the participants, on moral traits and behaviors of Big 5. We did this by emailing the informants and asking them to fill out a questionnaire. And like with Taya, there was, we promised that we wouldn't tell the participant how the informant rated them and so on. So the participants knew the informants would rate them, but knew they wouldn't find out what their informant said about them. And the informants knew that too. So across different studies, we had different kind of measures of morality. So these are some of the moral traits we looked at, and in some cases we didn't set out to study morality. So these were items we selected out of bigger questionnaires that we thought had some moral connotation. And then we also had more specifically moral behaviors. This was specifically in the studies that included the ear. We were interested in asking about the specific behaviors we knew we were going to code with the ear. So some of these are behaviors that you saw Matthias present about. So what I'm going to show you next is the correlation between self and informants on these moral traits and moral behaviors. So remember the benchmark for the big five is about 0.3, 0.4. I have means. I'm going to skip the means. Okay, so this is self-other agreement at the item level. So for gossip, for example, self-other agreement correlation is pretty high. So this, as Will pointed out before, to get a strong correlation like this, some people need to be rated as gossiping a lot, and some people need to be rated as not gossiping very much. And the self and the informants need to agree about who those people are. So argue or fight is also pretty high, expressing sympathy, empathy, or concern, acting condescending, criticizing people, interrupting others. And then there were some with much lower self-other agreement correlations. So honest has no, it's a single item, right? So the honesty humility scale in Hexaco probably has as 10, yeah. So it's much higher. So keep in mind that these are single items, but the average correlation is 0.36, which is quite high for a single item. The 0.3 to 0.4 benchmark is for a multi-item scale usually. So overall, I think there's pretty good self-other agreement about morality, which is just one step towards establishing validity, right? They could both be wrong even when they agree, but it's some evidence. You know, if you say that you are somebody who acts condescending a lot and your friends agree, then that's pretty good evidence. You might both be wrong, but okay, so then that's convergence among raters, and then the main purpose of this project of aim 1 of this project is to look at whether the ratings predict behavior. Does the ear pick up on the same things that the self-reports and the informant reports are picking up on? And personally, I'm also interested in whether self-reports or informant reports show different patterns of correlations with the ear. So I'm interested in whether the ear correlates with both, but also whether it correlates more with one or the other. And I have some reasons to suspect that maybe it should correlate better actually with informant reports than with self-reports. These are well-acquainted informants, people who know the target well. And in previous research, I found that for really evaluative traits and behaviors, self-reports are not as accurate as reports from close others. And so if these moral behaviors are things that people are kind of find evaluative, find really desirable or really undesirable, then they might not be great at rating it. Not necessarily because everyone sees themselves positively. In fact, the informant reports are more positive than the self-reports. But because self-biases, both positive and negative self-biases, some people are way too hard on themselves, seem to impact the accuracy of self-ratings more than the informant's biases, which tend to be just positive biases. So they shift all the informant reports in the same direction, which doesn't really mess up their rank order accuracy. So my prediction would be that the informant reports should maybe correlate a little bit better with the ear behavior. But so to test this, we had the question how to measure moral behavior, and we used the ear, of course. So this is study 5 from the study I talked about before. The ends shift a lot because it depends when we did the analyses, so we kept collecting data. So now we have more than 100 participants, but we don't have the ear data coded for more than 100 participants. So in this study, participants wore the ear for 4 days. We got about 100 sound files per day. And so what we're doing in coding the ears is we're doing it 2 different ways. We're having one team of coders do what Matthias talked about, which is coding the presence or absence of each of these behaviors. Did the person interrupt anybody during this 30-second sound file? Did they act condescending? Did they, and so on. We're having another team of coders try something new to see, it's faster, but we don't know yet whether it's valid. So we're going to see if it works. And if they listen to a set of sound files, 5 or 6 at a time, which represents an hour of the participant's life, and then they rate on a Likert scale how condescending was the person, how much compassion did they express, and so on, because the binary coding is so slow. So we're doing both in parallel. The Likert ratings are going a lot faster. So the preliminary data we have are from the Likert ratings, but even that is slow. And so we have 1 to 2 coders so far that listen to the files. So 1 hour of the participant's life, they rated each moral behavior. We averaged across sound files for each behavior. But we only have an N of 18 even for the Likert ratings. Actually, we have more now, but at the time that we were preparing this talk, we had an N of 18. So again, I don't want you to read much into the magnitude of the correlations. I'm just showing what analyses we'll do once we have more data. So these were the behaviors. The ones in red are the ones that we had pre-tested the reliability of the coders, but since this is a new kind of coding, I'm not sure, we don't have enough data yet to look at the reliability and validity of this new style of coding. Okay, so I'm going to put up the first column of correlations is going to be the correlation between the self-rating of the behavior and your Likert ratings of the behavior by the coders. The second column is a correlation between whether the informant said you do this behavior a lot and whether you did it a lot on the ER codings. Okay, so I'm going to skip to the slide that has actual numbers for you guys. You can handle the real numbers. They vary a lot. And the overall correlations do favor informant reports a little bit, but I wouldn't read anything into that at this point. So the average correlation is 0.1 for self and 0.17 for informant, both pretty low. But again, I think that once we have more coders, that'll increase the reliability of the codings. And once we have more participants, we'll have more reliable estimates of the effect sizes. But you can see, like for offers, favors, help, or support, both self and informants were pretty accurate. 0.36 for self, 0.50 for informants. Same thing for did or said something funny. Self-reports 0.44, informant reports 0.25. So what that tells us, if this holds up, let's pretend that these were the results with more data, is that people who say that they are funny, they act funny on the ear recordings too, and their informants say that they're funny. And same thing with people who say that they offer favors, help, or support, or vice versa, right? People who say, I'm not the kind of person that offers favors, help, or support, right? Well, it turns out that is consistent with what they do on the ear and what their friends say about them. So for some behaviors, we are finding convergence across all three methods. For others, less so. So like apologize, so far, we don't see any evidence that if you say or your friends say you're someone who apologizes a lot or doesn't apologize a lot, that doesn't seem so far to be mapping on.
What do negative correlations mean?
Hopefully they'll go away. They mean that if you, so like express warmth towards others, the more you say you're someone who does that, the less the coder.
It's all those false apologies.
So yeah, so it'll be interesting to see once we have more data, once we have more coders for each data point, once we have the binary codings as well as the Likert, and once we have it across other data sets too.
So I mean, were those the exact same self-reported items as the behaviors? Did you?
Yes.
I do or say something funny on a regular basis, for example, or I gossip?
It was compared to other people, how much do you do these things? Yes, we had, so for funny we had both the trait and the behavior, but I think these correlations are with the behavior. For some of them they were also on the trait questionnaire, but these are all from the behavior item ratings. Yeah.
You said that these are compared to other people, is how you have the reference or something?
Yeah.
So it could be that like agreeable people are just, they're giving other people a lot of credit or something.
Right, yeah. Yeah, so and that, I mean, I think that's an interesting issue about self-deception in general, that if you are wrong about yourself, it might not be that you don't know your behavior, it might be that you don't know where your behavior puts you in the distribution. So you might think that apologizing 10 times a day is totally normal and everybody does it. But I mean, it's an interesting question about whether that counts as self-knowledge or not. If you know that you apologize 10 times a day, but you think that makes you average, do you have self-knowledge or do you not? I think it's interesting. I think that's all I have anyway, so yeah, there's just a question mark there. Matthias, do you want to come up here and then we can...
All right, so if you can raise your hand and keep him up for a minute, and I apologize if I'm just describing you by something you're wearing. Yes.
I'm just curious about, and again, I'm not a psychologist, so this might be a silly question, but the apologizing is interesting because does that mean they ask how often do you apologize? Because that would imply that you're doing something wrong a lot that requires apology. So the fact that you're going to apologize a lot doesn't seem to relate to any particular.
That's a good point.
In fact, saying I apologize a lot might mean that you're a bad person. So I kind of wondered what purpose that was, what trait it was trying to pick up or activity it was trying to pick up.
It has probably both a component of true regret, but maybe a stronger component of kindness. And so I think...
But because the apology is hard to recognize that you're doing something wrong, though, this is why I'm wondering why a tendency to apologize is meant to be a moral... I wouldn't see it if someone said to me, well, I tend to apologize a lot. I'd be like, well, I don't ever want to be your friend. So
keep in mind that these are not the big, like coming with flowers, and I think in most cases these are, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hold the door open, I'm sorry. So it's more, I think it reflects a good amount of consideration and kindness.
okay.
I think if we think of people who apologize, at least the people I think of aren't people who do a lot of bad things, or people who just, like, anytime they bump into somebody, you're going to say, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. But, yeah, I think it depends. Maybe there's both kinds.
It just
It would be
seems
interesting to
not
code.
clearly a kind of a moral
Yeah, I mean, one thing is a lot of these behaviors were chosen specifically because they were acoustically detectable and
Oh, I see.
happen on a regular basis. So we were constrained by those limitations.
Okay, thank you.
In the back with it.
I have a couple questions. First, I was wondering why criticizing was categorized as a evaluatively negative behavior. I guess how your coders might be interpreted. So, for example, suppose I was wearing this and I reported to my partner. I say, you know, I was driving in with my dad and he was breaking the speed limit on the way. It made me a little bit nervous. Does that count as criticizing him, pointing out that he was violating the speed limit? Is that like a negative thing that I just did?
It depends. So criticizing is defined as, so constructive criticism or critiquing is not part of it. It's the kind of negative criticizing. If you say, I think you're probably going beyond the speed limit, we would not code that as criticizing. If you say, man, you're driving fast again, we would code that as criticizing.
That might be like a helping sort of behavior. It might be a way of informing someone so that they
Yeah, it has that information component for the problem.
The other one was about open-mindedness. So suppose I'm wearing the recorder and I'm walking on campus and someone comes up to me and they say, oh, did you hear they never landed on the moon? That was a hoax. They did it somewhere out in Arizona. They did it. And I say, oh, come on, that's just silly. Am I being closed-minded?
So I guess since we didn't code closed-mindedness, the question would be, if you had said, oh, what an interesting theory, would that count as open-mindedness? I think so.
I think open-mindedness may be one of the trickier categories.
Yeah. I mean, I think one interesting thing we'll be able to do with this, we also have Big 5 ratings and other trait ratings to see, like, yeah, is criticizing others or expressing open-mindedness actually a good thing? And one thing we can see is, like, do your friends like you better if you're someone who expresses open-mindedness who doesn't criticize people? And I actually think there's going to be a lot of variability in that. Some people, like, my favorite personality item on any questionnaire is item 1 of the CAQ, which is critical, skeptical, not easily impressed. So, and I'm also dating a philosopher, so it's probably not a coincidence. But I think, right, some people would consider that a virtue and some people would consider that something they don't want in a friend, but we can empirically see whether people who criticize people more have worse friendships or better friendships.
So I should say that in the selection of the items, we went kind of both ways, but we now pretended to mostly go one way. We went, for sure, from sound files, what can you code, to the self-reports. On the other hand, openness to experience, we tried to also be fair to the questionnaires that are out there. And so we went the other way and said, can we detect that? And those are behaviors that I think will have a harder time coding, or some of those. But we included them in the exploratory items. But the coding system I presented, that was this way. From we know we can code them, let's get them in self-report. But we also have some other items, and openness is one of those.
Okay, great. Adam?
Yeah, this is related to John's question, but a more general question about how much information you have about the situational context in which you get these 30-second clips. So when you're doing the coding, especially the individual coding, as opposed to the coding of the entire hour-long set of clips, I can see how some of these where it seems like it's going to be more or less obvious what's going on in the situation as far as if you're bragging, right, it seems pretty obvious what's going on in a bragging situation if all you've got is 30 seconds. But if you're expressing thanks or gratitude, you could be expressing thanks or gratitude for something really bad. Or if you're showing expressions of warmth, you might be showing them to the wrong person at the wrong time, right? So what methods do you have for controlling for that, I guess is what I'm asking. Do you have any methods? Do you have any information from the subjects about the situations? Do they sort of give you a report about, if you have a question, who are you talking to? Or what was that situation about? Do you have any way to do that?
It is a good question, obviously, and I guess that's where ultimately what the real good study would be, and which what actually Simi is doing, that we get collateral experience sampling information along with it. And that would be wonderful. That would be, I mean, we're still facing some technological barriers with that, but that would be great. Having said that, I'm a strong proponent. I will defend those short sound files. And the reason why I will do so is because we have a decade on studies on thin slice literature, and 30 seconds actually carries a lot of information. It's something that, I mean, that concern is prevalent. And from my experience, what I can tell you is that what I played you is like 10, 15 seconds, so I cut them down. It's much shorter than what we usually have. We also played with 50 sound files to alleviate some of those concerns. And what we find is that reliability tends to go down in some way a little bit, because it's much harder. I mean, you have a thinner slice, you have a more precise behavior. This is just one behavior, we can code that. You have more information. You say, is this right now, is this bragging? Is this right now arrogant? Is this right now, oh, there's a little bit of kindness actually in there. This is really weird. And so the longer you get this, the more you, in some way, it's a little, confuse the coders. I think it's easier to get precise codings on shorter sound files. And it seems to be good for the reliability. That does not, I mean, the fact that you could show warmth to the wrong person, not covered by that. I mean, so if you show warmth to the wrong person, for our purposes, you show warmth. Sorry, but it's, I mean, that's a concern.
Yeah, it's just exactly the same worry that Adam had. I mean, I agree with you, and you can be fairly accurate in your assessment of something like blaming, criticizing, apologizing, so forth. But when it comes to justifiable apologizing, justifiable blaming, when we're bringing these evaluative notions, it seems like you need a lot more information about the context, the situation, that you're not going to get via the ear. So it's the same word again.
Even though justifiable is kind of a tough term, because when I argue with my spouse, I tend to find my position quite justifiable. But yeah.
I also do want to add, so because the coders listen to the sound files in order, they have a sense of what the person was doing right before and then eventually right after. And so sometimes you can tell from the trajectory of the sound files, the person that they're apologizing to, did they just fight with them, or is it someone they weren't interacting with before? Is it someone new? And sometimes, yeah, so you can get a little bit of context just from the fact that you have these sound files in order, and the day makes sense when you listen to them and you know how their day went.
I couldn't be more excited about this. I think I've read some of your prior work, eavesdropping on other things like happiness, and I guess I think that generally in personality research, people undercount the problem of reference bias. Like, I think doing 7 hours of work at night is about average, is your tenure track professor, right? And then somebody else would say, oh gosh, that's like at the top of the scale. But I guess I'm wondering whether if you've thought about virtues in character that are nonverbal. So I'm sure you've thought about this. I just wanted to know, and I'm thinking about self-control and persistence, and I can't think of the verbalizations that would go along with many of those things. So are there ways to adapt the technique to pick up on more nonverbal behaviors?
And that, so the easiest answer truly is that I, at the bottom of my heart, believe we need to combine that with experience sampling, and that would give you those subjective parts. I mean, you could take your question a different route. You could say, well, how about facial expressions? I mean, you could start thinking about video. That sounds conceptually very appealing. It sounds practically very critical, because there's lots of ethical issues and data privacy issues anyway to be addressed just with the ear. And one reason why I think one way in which we can handle it is by saying, well, it's de-identified largely, at least. Voice is kind of tricky because some people consider voice inherently de-identifiable. Oh, by the way, sound files, we have explicit consent to play those sound files at scientific presentations. So if you have the face of the person, assuming the video.
Sampling would be like you get a beat and then you do the experience sampling form, and then the sound file would be shortly after that? Is that how it would work?
I would put it shortly before that, because otherwise you have the expectation.
Or what we do, so we just started using experience sampling with the ear, and so we do the ear as normal, so 30 seconds every 12 minutes or that kind of thing. And we do experience sampling pretty much the same way everyone does, so when they get the link, it asks about the last hour or the last 2 hours, that kind of thing. And we can match the ear sound files to the time they're reporting about. So it's not down to the moment, but down to the hour. So if from the ear I can tell you we're arguing a lot and being condescending and bragging, And then from the experience sampling, you told me you didn't like the person you were interacting with, right? Or that you, and we actually ask about self-control in the experience sampling. So we ask about things that are more internal and then match them up with some slice of the same period that you were reporting on this experience.
Okay, great. We have, I'm going to give us a few extra minutes, but if we can keep questions brief.
Yes, so I have two questions. The first was Angela's question about non-verbal virtues. My second question had to do with coding. So when I saw you coding optimism as a behavior, my first thought was, oh, I never thought of optimism as a behavior, right? But then I was thinking, well, when people talk about being optimistic, sometimes they might be saying optimistic things because they are optimistic, or it might be because the cultural norms about what you're supposed to say, right? So for example, if you looked at your data set looking at cancer survivors and someone said, well, what doesn't kill me makes me stronger, you could quote that, oh, this person is finding positive benefits, or you could be thinking, well, that person is saying that because that's what you say, right? You may not believe it, you may not internalize it. So I'm wondering, when you code these data, do you try and find ways of assessing whether, if this is like a position that person is personally taking, or whether it's some sort of norm that's what
trying the person to say. That's a great comment. I think the short answer is that we tell participants to stay close to the sound, but to make minor inferences about the sincerity of it. So if it was obviously fake or whatever, we would not code that. But if the person says, "Hey," in the breast cancer study, come on, like everything's gonna be fine, it's gonna be good. We do code that as optimism, and it may be the culture the cultural norm that makes the person behave in that way. We cannot distinguish between that. I wonder to what extent self-reports then can, but we can't. And you have, along those lines, you have biases in some ways as well. There's as Matthias said, the self has privileged access to some things, and those parts we don't get. So I see this really as a complement. Say we find stability with self-reports, but do we find it in those little daily behaviors that we observe where we don't have some of the biases that are present in self-report?
I was just going to comment on the apologizing thing. I'm clumsy, so I'm apologizing all the time for stepping on people.
So one last question.
I'm wondering whether silence has a particular meaning. I'm wondering whether that's something that you can look at.
Silence? That's very interesting. It's 2/3 of the sound file. So I found it that one of the first revelations were our lives are so boring. Like it's really constrained to 1/3 of our time. So I guess I find it particularly interesting because it would, for the very first time, be that we try to distinguish different kinds of silence. Just not talking, but being in the presence of somebody and not talking. And that would be it's a bit hard to detect, but maybe we could. If there's some noises of another person, we haven't done, but it's very interesting.
As something that maybe we'll be able to answer with the experience sampling. So we'll be able to tell, the people who are silent more, are they less happy? Or when you're silent, are you less happy? Or is it about being silent but being around others is just as good as talking?
Great. So I've been told that the speakers will be happy to continue the conversation during cocktail hour and breaks. So join me in thanking our speakers.